Welcome, everyone, to our half-day CLE on artificial intelligence. My name is Vijay Lala. I'm a partner in the technology transactions practice at Fenwick. I'm based in the New York office, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by a number of my colleagues across our offices, as well as some of our former colleagues and some in-house counsel to speak to all of you today about artificial intelligence. I'm going to go through the agenda briefly. We're going to have some housekeeping on CLE. And then we'll just jump right in. So today we're going to be talking about the state of play in AI on this panel. So we're going to be talking about sort of more general overview of what we're seeing in our practices. We're then going to drill in on the next session on building a terms of service and some of the related IP issues that we see there, followed by a brief chat between myself and a client of ours as well, who's going to be on Zoom. So hopefully that will work well. We're then going to be talking about copyright registration and related enforcement issues. And then, of course, ethics, which is a really interesting topic with respect to AI, but also a great set of credits for all of you to have today as well. I'm going to give a brief intro to the topic with some slides, and then we're going to jump right into the discussion today. Okay, AI in the news. So this is interesting because I did this weekend, and I would say that means I did this 30 days ago in AI time. So I will do my best to update you as we go with some of the news that I've seen since. But this weekend, Snapchat released its chatbot, and Amazon released a product called Dialogue Boost, which allowed people to hear better when they're interacting with content. So we're already seeing media content and gaming and other entertainment providers implementing tools to increase engagement with consumers for various reasons, whether it's implementing a tool to sort of help hear or implementing a tool to help interact. Now, I have a couple teenagers at home. They didn't really love the chatbot Snapchat experience yet, but I think it'll get better in time. And so I think they'll probably engage with it better. We're also seeing search wars with respect to AI, which we all know. Bard recently improved its ability to allow somebody to code in 20 different languages. We're seeing cities in Japan in particular adopt ChatGPT and other AI to help government employees function more efficiently. You know, autonomous driving is where we saw AI sort of originally sort of used the most, and we're now seeing it in consumer products. So apparently AI-powered strollers exist. I found this during my prep. So like I said, I have teenagers, but to the extent you want to, carry your baby and have your stroller go on its own merry way, it seems like you can do that now.
When I saw that, I actually thought it might be one of the fake examples of a use of AI, the AI-powered stroller.
There is a video of this, and we'll talk about advertising regulation issues in a second, but as to whether or not it actually can do that on its own so well. But, we're seeing potential uses of AI across businesses. So whether you're a B2B company, Bloomberg GPT is a good example of taking AI and creating a more efficient data set and tool that you're already using in a proprietary manner with your customers. In this case, with respect to Bloomberg terminals for finance. We see this great slide, which we'll have later again with Midjourney creating content through platforms such as Discord. And we're lucky to have Arjun from Discord here as well. We'll introduce himself in a minute. I think we've all heard about AI Drake in the last couple of weekends. There was a Rihanna Bad Bunny song that happened yesterday, I think. So this continues. And I think that you're seeing lots of interesting innovation in the creative space using AI. However, you're also probably going to see, as we'll talk about in our enforcement summit, our CLE, a lot of rights holders sort of getting, a little bit nervous about that as well. And we'll talk about that during our generative AI questions with the panel. Government regulation. So Homeland Security creating an artificial intelligence task force. That was one of the things on my mind, so we don't have another Ultron situation in real life. And, yesterday, and I tried to wrap my arms around this last night because, again, things are happening quite quickly. But yesterday we had a joint announcement from the FTC, the EEOC, the Civil Rights Division, the DOJ, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, essentially saying that we already have the power within the government to enforce with respect to AI development. And some of the key takeaways in that were very similar to what we're seeing across both state legislation with respect to employment and privacy legislation. It's really about sort of looking at your data to make sure that it's not discriminatory, thinking about your model and making sure it's opaque and transparent to the consumer as to how you end up with the decision that the automated technology makes, and ensuring that ultimately there's a fair outcome. So a lot of the privacy states legislation talks about sort of ensuring there's a fair outcome by doing an assessment impact, right? An impact assessment to ensure that the algorithm itself doesn't produce negative outcomes that could affect people with respect to housing, with respect to discrimination, with respect to financial products. So whether you're a B2B or a B2C company, I think you're seeing a regulatory framework start to develop that's quite consistent, both on the federal and the state level, which is a little bit unusual. The US tends to be a patchwork typically on the regulation side. So I think we're seeing consistent themes with respect to what we're going to have to do to the extent that you're building an AI product, you're going to have to think about on many fronts. Okay, now I'm going to turn to our panel, which I'm really excited about because I get to stop presenting. But I'm really thrilled to have all of you here today. It would be great for you to all introduce yourselves, and would love to sort of just start with an easy, broader question, which is how are you seeing AI in your practice? Arjun, maybe we can start with you since you're our guest today. Maybe introduce yourself and start to chat with us about what's going on at Discord and what you're seeing with platforms generally.
Yeah, thanks, BJ, and thanks for having me. I'm Arjun, commercial counsel at Discord, former Fenwick associate. Spent a lot of my time over the last year just counseling on strategic AI initiatives at Discord. Didn't expect to be doing that when I took the job, but that's what it became. Negotiated our technology deals with key partners like OpenAI and Google. And I'll just start by talking about the ways in which Discord is kind of intersecting with AI right now. Oh, and yeah, thanks for the reminder. I'm speaking here in my individual capacity, not on behalf of Discord, so remember that. Yeah, so first I want to highlight there's been a kind of an explosion on Discord of just AI communities, communities built around AI projects. I think the biggest one that most of you have probably heard of is Midjourney. I think that's actually our largest server out of all servers on Discord right now is dedicated to Midjourney. It's got over 14 million members, which is pretty crazy. Definitely just seeing so much engagement. Users get to kind of go in, enter their prompts in on the Midjourney server and generate art. And like kind of everyone in the server can see that art, and then you can fine tune it in different ways. You can pick different variations. It's pretty fun. So there's a lot of communities like that, similar art generators to Midjourney. Also folks that have built chatbot integrations or other generative AI types of projects. The other kind of way in which Discord is intersecting with AI right now is around kind of first party AI features that are being built into products. And I think VJ mentioned Snapchat rolled out their My AI chatbot recently. Slack announced an integration with Anthropic, which is another chatbot company. And Discord is kind of doing the same. We've beta launched a chatbot powered by OpenAI models. And we're also exploring AI in other ways, around like moderation tools, conversation summaries, things that you maybe don't expect from like the use cases you hear in the news about generative AI. And then there's just tons and tons of issues in this space for platforms. I think the ones I'll focus on that keep me up at night are around kind of liability for AI output, both on the copyright infringement side and also on just kind of defamation liability, speaker liability. And it's kind of a unique problem because you don't necessarily control what the model is going to say. You don't control the user inputs, but there's a world in which you could be held liable for it, or maybe not. I think it's unsettled law at this point. The other kind of big topic we focus on is privacy considerations, just around the use of user data and inputs when you kind of expose a generative AI model to the public through your product. I think most of you have probably heard that like there's a lot of regulatory scrutiny, especially in Europe, around AI company privacy practices. We've seen Italy ban ChatGPT. I think other European regulators are considering taking enforcement action based on GDPR violations. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that space evolves. And then the other main concern we're focused on is just kind of just the PR risk of incorporating AI. I think people acknowledge that there's, controversial topics in terms of how AI models have been trained and also just what they're doing with user data. So, I think it's important to just be really thoughtful about how you roll those types of features out. I think one example of the Snapchat My AI product that was rolled out recently, I think I saw that they're being review bombed in the App Store with 1-star reviews because people don't like the feature. They think it's too invasive. It's sort of forced on them at the top of their feed. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time, interesting space to be involved in, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say.
So Jennifer, you thought the stroller might not be real, and the FTC has spoken about advertising with respect to AI products, making sure that your products actually do what they say. As one of the leaders of our gaming practice, I'm sure you're seeing AI in terms of enhancing consumer experiences, but you're also probably being asked a lot of questions about the same thing, whether it's the right time, whether it's the right place, whether it's the right experience. How, from a legal perspective, are you sort of seeing that shape through your practice more generally? And then we're going to dig into some of those questions a little bit later as well.
Sure. It's a very large question. I'm Jennifer Stanley. I'm a partner in our technology transactions group here based in San Francisco. And my practice focuses almost exclusively on business to consumer related products and services, and then the B2B adjacent products and services that go with those consumer products and services. So my personal view is with respect to whether companies should be considering adopting AI and leaning into it or not. From a personal perspective, I think the answer is yes, because I liken that to we should go to the moon because we can. We should take advantage of technology because it's there. It's one of the reasons why I love my practice here at Fenwick, because we literally get to see the future. And for those of you who know me, and for our clients in the audience and on Zoom, you bring us the future and we often see it years in advance. And so I think, to echo what Arjun said, the issues that I'm seeing in my practice, both in the gaming practice, which I'll speak to later, but in general, are, how to thread the copyright issues, the right of publicity issues, the privacy issues, and then content moderation and all of the things that come with integrating something that is as innovative and potentially helpful and product changing as an AI integration can be and what it can bring to an offering. And then in my practice in particular, I'm seeing it from both sides of the coin, from the building of an AI solution and the considerations for what does a data set look like? What kind of approach should a company take when considering how to build a model, to do it in a thoughtful way, to do it in a way that is legal or defensible? Because I think sometimes the law is catching up with some of the use cases of the solutions. And then on the other side, how companies think about using them in a way that matches the integrity of the product offering, and then what is appropriate for the product offering. A little bit counter to what I said a moment ago, leaning into new technology is something we should do, but it should be done in a thoughtful way. And I've spoken to some of you already, those of you who are clients, about how to think about what to do with taking advantage of some of the technologies. So it's for a copyright lawyer or for a commercial transactional lawyer, it brings a host of really cool issues, and I'm just looking at them from a use case by use case basis.
That's great. And then Andrew, as one of the leaders of our fintech and blockchain practice, can you sort of talk about how you're seeing it in your practice as well?
Sure thing. Happy to. Just for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Klungnes. I'm also a partner in the technology transactions department. I'm based in Santa Monica, so a few miles south from here, short flight. And yeah, as Vijay mentioned, I'm one of the leaders of the fintech and blockchain practice. I guess without even really considering the industry vertical, I guess I'd say just as a lawyer, as a partner in a law firm, at some level a business owner, how do these technologies affect my practice and what I do? And I think at a broad level, I find myself spending a lot more time thinking about what I do that is better than a machine can do, and I think used to be some of that was creativity, and now some of the new tools can bring some creativity and bring some help you brainstorm and thought provoke, and just make sure to check the legal citations. But in all seriousness, thinking more about the human side of the practice, thinking about emotions and interrelationships and things that, mentoring, things like that, again, it's going to be a long time before a machine can replicate. I guess specifically in the two verticals, I mean, there's a little bit of a tale of two cities with fintech, which largely revolves around fiat currency, and we focus on representing the disruptive companies, often dealing with financial institutions, and in that world, we have a world of opportunity, right? Not many people like their bank. There are treasure troves of data that financial institutions have. Often that is highly proprietary and indeed, personal to a consumer. There are also almost national security level secrets that a bank will have, particularly around things like suspicious activity reports. Nonetheless, properly, de-identified, et cetera, could be used for training data. So we have a lot of clients that are very interested in that data, very interested in developing products and services that make, whether it's help wealth advisors better advise their clients, whether it's customer service agents that are, powered by AI, on both the traditional fintech side and the blockchain side. Obviously, trading and price prediction and discovery and things like that are, obviously a very important part of, what those companies do. And we're very lucky to have a lot of clients doing some very interesting things in that regard. So just this world of opportunity, and also just having data and use of data going from, a situation where almost no bank would ever consider letting you ever touch any data whatsoever, to clients saying, look, you're leaving a lot of, value on the table, bank. How do we incorporate that in the transaction? And we find more forward-thinking folks at traditional financial institutions realize that they are leaving a lot of value on the table. And I spend a lot of time working with clients to create things like data cooperatives, where if a bank, I using the term bank loosely to mean, legacy financial institutions will allow access to certain amounts of data, then they'll get some insights from the total pool of consumers. And obviously, the financial services world is probably as highly regulated as it gets. And, obviously there's part of the flip side of the world of opportunity commercially that I deal with is a world of risk for our regulatory lawyers, who take a very close look at different activities and determine how risky is risky, and how can we present our clients' products and services to very scrutinous lawyers at again, banks, and how do we make this all happen and create a more just and fair, interesting, fun, and productive financial climate for everybody else. And then the pure blockchain side, I think we'll get to a little bit later on in the panel.
Yeah, I mean, that was really helpful. I think you touched on a lot of different things, starting off with sort of how you might even think about using it for your practice, right? And so, as a former in-house lawyer, I used to read emails sometimes from outside counsel and be like, where is the answer in here? I'm still reading and it's like 2 pages. And so, we try to pride ourselves on giving some practical insights into the issues that you're all facing. And, I was actually with an employment lawyer last weekend at lunch, and they said, no, this is a privacy issue. And I said, no, I think it's an employment issue too. Like, no, it's a privacy issue. And they gave me sort of a very stern look. And so I think a head in the sand approach was sort of happening there. And I don't think any of us can really do that, which is what Jennifer touched on. So, let's just say this is hypothetical. I was on a call last week with a client, and the CFO and legal wanted to put together an internal policy with respect to use of AI by their employees. And the CEO sort of stopped it in its tracks, saying it's too fast. I don't really want a policy. I want people to just go and be productive and let them use it. And I'm okay with that. But as lawyers, we sort of start to put our hats on. We start to think about all the various buckets of potential risk there. And it's, are we putting confidential information and trade secret information into this third-party tool? What are the scope of rights that we're providing to the tool, which Arjun said he's losing sleep over, apparently, and whether that output is even IP that's still owned by the company. And so these are real issues. Just as I said, the weekend in the news, I think it was maybe yesterday that ChatGPT rolled out both an incognito product as well as indicated it's going to be rolling out a ChatGPT for business. With that backdrop, sorry, I'm sort of switching back to slides because we got a little technical difficulties again. Jennifer, can you talk about sort of when I have a client, or even with Fenwick, when we're thinking about drafting our own AI policy, what are some of the key things that you're discussing? Is it as easy as use a business solution, an enterprise solution, or is there a lot more conversation around sort of how to think about that from a practical perspective as an in-house lawyer?
The conversations that I've been having, both here internally at the firm for our own policy, as we think about how we adopt these tools to make us more efficient, and also with you guys, really goes to what is the use case for your business. So I've yet to talk to a client which has decided we're just not going to use it. And I think that's not realistic, my personal view, just based on where the technology is. So with that in mind, then I think it depends on what your business actually does. So if you're a game company, and I talk to game companies all the time, every day, several times a day about this, as you're thinking about conceiving what your AI policy is going to be, what is working on an assumption that there will be almost certainly a enterprise version of the solution that your company will use. First of all, what is that? So is that a walled garden or a closed loop system where the AI only trains on your own data? Or are you the type of company that considers the community benefit a benefit overall, and therefore you're okay with having an enterprise version that doesn't have a closed loop system? And what I mean by that is you can have a system where the inputs into the AI tool will only remain within your own environment. And then you can have a system where the inputs will be used in your own environment, but can also be used to train the AI model overall. So depending on what you do as a business and depending on what the use case is, the risk profile and the appetite for risk is different. So for a game company, if you allow your creative designers to use an AI tool, if you're using it to do concept art ideation for key characters, keeping things within a closed loop system is going to be important, because almost certainly you would rather not have the broader AI model learn how to visually create your key characters where you believe there's going to be valuable IP. On the other hand, if you're talking about rendering worlds with relatively common visual use cases, grass, concrete, walls, things like that, maybe it's less important. Some of the issues that we consider in terms of the ownership of outputs, and we'll talk about this a lot today, right now, there's a debate about whether or not the output is protectable by copyright. If the visual rendering of a blade of grass in your game isn't protected by copyright, maybe that's fine. Because that's never something you're really going to need to assert ownership over. But you really do care about the visual rendering of your key character or a key component of a unique aspect of your environment. So I think the use cases are important. Likewise with code and code generation. If it's a module that could easily be replaced by another module that was clean room, maybe it's less worrisome than using an AI tool to generate code that is going to be so integrally linked to a product's code base that you couldn't decouple them. And so, the nuances of the discussion that I've been having and how you think about what your AI corporate policy is going to be, I think really goes to who at the organization is going to be using the tools and what are you going to be using them for. And there is some tactical value that I know some of you see, and there's a debate on this too, in having a policy allowing the tools to be used in certain circumstances, as opposed to Vijay's example, which is the CEO says, go, 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 we must use it for everything. And, for those of you who are trying to help your clients figure this out from a legal risk perspective internally, I think there is some benefit in being able to tell the engineering team you can use, Copilot for A and B, but not C, D, and E. It allows a tolerance and a support of the innovation without putting the company at risk.
So Arjun, from an in-house perspective, not going to ask about sort of in-house lawyers that might be worried about, AI sort of becoming their CEO thinks that's the solution where it clearly is not. But more so, how do you think about productivity versus risk from a business perspective, right? I mean, obviously you're going to want to use AI to improve efficiency on some level, but you also have these IP concerns. You probably have concerns about your people to make sure that everybody's sort of on the same page about how AI is going to be implemented. Can you just tell us a little bit from an in-house perspective, sort of how you think about that? Doesn't necessarily have to be what Discord is thinking, but sort of how you would think about it as an in-house lawyer generally.
Yeah, definitely. I think echo what Jennifer said, that like realistically, people are going to be using AI at your company, whether or not you know about it. It's better, I think, to have a policy in place and get in front of the ways in which which things could potentially go wrong with that usage. I think the things I can see going wrong, there was an example with Samsung. I think they had employees who basically were putting in source code or trade secrets into just the public version of ChatGPT. They didn't opt out of training, letting ChatGPT train on the inputs. So, it's kind of a theoretical risk, but you can see a world where, now there's a model that has that proprietary info baked into it and could enable a competitor to, build something similar. So I think there's definitely a way to be flexible here and not take a rigid approach, but also preserve sort of your position and avoid risk. Like, I liked Jennifer's idea of sort of having that list of approved tools, approved use cases. You do want to try to vet the contracts for the tools, make sure you understand whether or not your inputs can be used to train general models for the benefit of everyone. Or I think some tools also have restrictions that prohibit kind of commercial use or competitive use, which, if people are just going hog wild and using AI kind of on their private accounts or, without even going through procurement or whatever, you have no visibility into that. So you really want to get ahead of it. You want to have something. It doesn't have to be the most detailed policy. I think speed is key, because I think that's what caught Samsung off guard. It was such a quick thing. Like, okay, everyone's using ChatGPT all of a sudden for work, and boom, we kind of have a data leak. So, I think, you want to take a flexible approach. You can consider, hard limitations on what can be shared with certain tools, depending on the use case. I think one to consider is maybe no user data, or like real user data that hasn't been de-identified, employee personal information, things like that. You also want to just really stress the importance of, AI is not a substitute for human review. You can't just rely on it without doing that vetting on the human side or running it through your normal security checks. And especially with code, you just can't rely on what's baked into the tool. You have to actually train your engineers to know that like, hey, they can't just use output without vetting it themselves. There's going to be potential for mistakes, hallucinations, potential just vulnerabilities being introduced into your code base. So yeah, I think the other just area I'll just touch on is like you also want to make sure you're kind of making clear rules about what you can and can't use it for. And I think one hard rule is like, you don't want to be using it for like things like employment decisions, things that have been kind of already signaled in the EU that like, we are going to treat this as like a high risk use case for the use of AI. And yeah, the last thing I would just stress is just, training. Like you can have a policy in place, but like it's not going to mean anything unless you actually get out there, like do trainings for your engineers, your marketing team, let them ask questions, let them engage with you on like what they're doing now. Because I think a lot of teams just kind of assume, hey, this is how we've been doing it. Like it should be fine. Like it's kind of grandfathered in. So you want to have those touch points with your teams internally when you're in-house.
I think that's interesting because I think that trainings are probably pretty critical on the internal side to sort of educate your own folks about what they shouldn't do and what they can do. And as you mentioned, the EU, I think I mentioned earlier, I think California and New York have already started to pass laws with respect to employment using AI in that context. And I think the announcement yesterday was to sort of collectively say, like, we're looking at this from all sides with respect to privacy and employment. But we're also talking about content and music and games and entertainment today. And on the creative side, you're seeing an absolute explosion of creativity. Some people calling it sort of the new democratization of the entertainment industry. I'll show you a picture of Rexy and Tyra, my puppies up there, and we created a little image of them up there for you. So thanks for our team for doing that. But now I don't know if I own that image, and I lost the IP rights to that. But I do know there's a property right in California for use of pets and advertising because I've been around the block a few times. So warning, do not use my dogs. Anyway, so as we switch sort of to content and generative AI, you're sort of seeing this explosion of potential adoption of creativity, which is a good thing, but you're also seeing IP rights holders say, hey, wait a minute, right? So you got Warner sort of out there saying, hey, you're using our copyrights with respect to training. You also may have interfered with some of our contracts. And whose side are you on anyway, the human or the AI? So you're seeing rights holders sort of feel this is potentially dangerous for their business. But then I'm also seeing clients talk about how it actually could be enhancing the experience with respect to sort of AI interacting in a game. Again, sort of as with someone with a lot of advertising experience, I think making sure that it's disclosed that there's an interaction there may make sense if there's a product that's being sold. But overall, you can really enhance the experience with respect to entertainment. So Jennifer, I know you talked about this a little bit earlier, but can you give maybe an example or two of sort of what you're seeing with respect to generative AI and how it's being used by our clients and how sort of our in-house colleagues should be thinking about that?
Sure. So I think to state the blindingly obvious, the copyright issues are numerous, but there aren't any answers either at this moment in time. And I think considering how to generate generative AI and then use it, you got to just keep that in mind. So, right now, as we understand it, there isn't going to be a copyrightable interest vis-a-vis what the Copyright Office has told us, at least in the output. From a contract perspective, most tools that allow the creation of generative AI, like the images we're seeing on the screen right now, will allow the user of the tool from a contract perspective to own the output if it's ownable. And so again, to build on what I was saying earlier, there's no moving away from using generative AI tools for all of the reasons that Vijay said. It's great. It creates a great visual experience, whether it's for social media or games or some other kind of interactive entertainment. But it's a question of what is your company's value proposition with respect to the outputs. And if it's to create a fun, visual experience to advertise CLE like we're doing today, maybe the risk is worth using a tool to create the output. We didn't do that for our advertising today, by the way, but we could have. And so, but if we're going to use it to generate images that we believe we're going to have some investment of value in, then we would take a different approach. But I think the other issues, the right of publicity issues, are the other ones to really think about when you think about like what are the inputs that are going into it and what's coming out if we're using it from a visual perspective for people. And then just to look at it from the other side, which is important because I talk to you guys a lot about this, for training the data set. How is that done? The issues that we all are familiar with from a data scraping perspective, a web crawling perspective, the copyright, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, trespass to chattels, contract, all of those traditional things that we think about for extraction of data for a use that is not the original purpose for which the data was created. They're really the same issues. So I think there are some defensible positions for how to use data inputs to create the data sets to train the AI, but there's also a whole host of other issues there to think about. And inadvertently, those issues become your issues, even if you're using a tool that somebody else created, because you're creating your own data sets internally as well. So there is something to think about there too. But nonetheless, depending on the appetite for risk, this is one of those places where I see we will see some of these cases be resolved, and there's a lot kind of working their way through the system now, so we'll have more clarity in time. We don't have it now, so some of it is talking to people like us or others who you trusting your own understanding of the law, where you think it might go, where your business sits in terms of its risk continuum and so on. And I think we all share a different experience talking to clients on it, and I would imagine that Andrew and Arjun and you have different. You hear about different risk profiles as we talk to our clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you saw sort of the rights holders talk about copyright and talk about whose side are you on, but I think you'll see lots more cases around artists and right of publicity, sound alike cases. I think you'll see a lot of litigation. You'll also see the opposite, which is certain artists like Haley Grimes embrace it. But then there's a backdrop of regulation there too with respect to deep fakes, where the FTC has already talked about ensuring that consumers are not somehow deceived in connection with purchasing products using AI in those ways. Arjun, this sort of puts us a real onus on the sort of content moderation aspects of being, a publisher or, someone who has a platform. Normally you sort of have a pretty straightforward process right now with takedowns. To me, as I think about that, the analysis is much more complicated now. And when I think about that, I don't always think about just the legal theory behind that, but the fact that the resources are in-house to address those issues and respect to people pushing back on that, saying, hey, I've now created something that's either transformative or it didn't even use the voice of that person or the copyright rights, because it's sort of an output that's new or derivative or not protected. I mean, how do you think about the push and pull there with respect to some of those content moderation issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky, and companies are already struggling with that issue before generative AI came into the scene. And I think, there's another layer. As soon as you introduce a generative AI feature into your own product, it kind of introduces like a new fundamental risk profile for your platform. You may no longer be able to avail yourself of DMCA safe harbors. You may no longer have the benefit of Section 230, still up for discussion, but because that's your product creating the output. I think from the platform standpoint, like we don't usually control the inputs. We don't proactively filter what people can say on our platforms. it's usually like a reactive thing. And it's really hard to proactively filter content because you're balancing kind of the privacy considerations of users. Like, you're not supposed to be just monitoring everything that's going on in a communications platform. So it's definitely a balancing approach. You want to think about your reactive measures. I think a lot of companies will still sort of follow the typical takedown protocols, their usual DMCA playbook. There was a wrinkle recently, I think, with the Drake AI song saga, where I think YouTube got a takedown from UMG for the Drake song or the Drake AI song, but they didn't actually take it down at first because there was no actual copyright being infringed. So your existing process may not be sufficient. And so you really need to think about how these kind of edge cases would be applied. Especially, I think it's a bigger issue for the large platforms like YouTube, who have existing deals with third-party rights holders. They're no longer just in the world of the DMCA. They're now also bound by contract to these music companies, and maybe they have to take a more sort of aggressive takedown stance as opposed to just, following their typical DMCA, fair use analysis and all of that. So yeah, it's interesting times. I don't know that anyone's figured out how to moderate. I think another interesting just point I'll mention is, a lot of these models, especially you interact with ChatGPT or other generative AI models, they have built-in content moderation filters in them. If you've played around with them, you try to tell it to do something bad, it says, sorry, I can't help you with that. Unfortunately, it's pretty easy to jailbreak these models by, you can tell the chatbot it's opposite day and then get it to write an insult about your friends, or you could ask it to write you a sonnet about how to make a bomb. There's some crazy hypotheticals that we run through on a day-to-day basis, and I think you just do the best you can. And yeah,
so Andrew, I guess two questions. One is, does this just become sort of like fake news out there and it's tough to evolve? And ultimately, humans want to create, even if they're using tools to create. And so, as you think about your practice, NFTs, blockchain, there's more that sort of intersects than I think people think about, right? As businesses create and use tools to create, they're creating not only in sort of Web 2, they're creating in Web 3. So can you just talk a little bit about kind of how all of the generative AI conversation we've had impacts your practice? What are some of the things that we need to think about sort of from a creation standpoint in that context?
Yeah, thanks. I would echo both what Jennifer and Arjun said about this just being a host or panoply of complex issues. I think the particular Web3 filter on it is that Web3 largely embraces models of intellectual property ownership, if that, licensing rights, et cetera, that are a lot more open. You mentioned Grimes before. She was psyched to hear that people were using her voice for their own creative purposes, and put it out there that she wanted to develop or have developed a blockchain-based system so those uses could be tracked and revenue could be shared. Perhaps shockingly, she didn't have a whole lot of technical specifics about how exactly that would be implemented or how people would somehow, buy an NFT that would give them the right to do what she was describing, and they'd be free or very cheap or something like that. But still, I think it's a great, very interesting, and that's not her job. Her job is to be married to Elon and, more importantly, make music, right? So, I think that would be left to others. But I guess it's just to say it's a terrific example of how folks in Web3 think. I guess what's interesting is, you can't really share revenue if something is open. You can share revenue if something is open because it's free to be used, except you have to share the revenue. But in order for the revenue share mechanism to have any possibility of being enforced, there need to be some rights there. And then that's where I believe you get into some of the interesting issues that were alluded to before about right of publicity, how recognizable is somebody's voice, often vary. Copyrightability of computer generated works, et cetera, et cetera. I guess just to answer the question that nobody's expressly asking, but I can feel people asking in their mind is what the hell is my picture in computer form doing behind me?
I was going to ask you.
Yeah. But and I mean, just another aspect of sort of how does Web3 interlay with AI is just people that are really into crypto art are fascinated by science fiction and not so much fiction anymore, themes of how the human mind and thinking machines, if you've ever read Dune, interact, right? And in fact, this is a work done of me called Quantum Clungness by a friend, a client who's an artist who ripped my picture through a quantum computer and an AI art generating algorithm. And the whole theme is how does a quantum computer see and perceive a human being, and how would it render a human being? And some of these themes around, how can we tease the creativity out of a machine? Can machines feel and be creative? I mean, these are all, for those of us who are interested in things like Web3 are all often, very interesting themes to explore generally. I guess, how does that, what does that have to do with being a lawyer? I guess what that has to do with being a lawyer, it's also interesting because the very same, I of course fully gave to the extent I have any rights of publicity. I waived them because I wanted a pretty cool NFT to use in presentations and social media and so forth. So that was good. But in terms of things like copyrightability, it's just, it's asking the question. And I mean, I guess if you have an artist out there saying, hey, I didn't do anything, I just teased the machine and the machine rendered it, that might be a trickier piece of work to protect than something that involved a lot of human interaction or some very protectable art as at best, at worst training data, at best the direct inputs in the machine in the first place. Some artists particularly on the blockchain CC0 their art. In other words, they promise they're not going to enforce it ever against anybody. That very much aligns with Web3 ethos. And really, what is their business model? Their business model is essentially selling the Mona Lisa, right? There's a lot of public domain art I sure as hell would like to have an original copy of. So again, as Mona Lisa, starting to name your favorite museum piece, and the value of the NFT is owning the art, even if it's not in a physical copy. At the same time, I mean, there's a lot of open models that really depend on protectability of the rights. For example, the classic, commercial rights that many NFT owners enjoy are only valuable commercially because they're granted to one person, the NFT holder, right? Sometimes if you combine generative art with that model, you run the risk of something breaking. And, that's something we spend a lot of time, thinking about. I guess the other thing we finally spend a lot of time thinking about is what is the value of an NFT apart from the actual art, apart from the picture. And, frequently, and we're seeing more and more of this roll out, that the value comes from this sense of ownership and in fact, ownership recorded on a immutable database, as well as community, the utility offered by the project. You don't get cool concert tickets, you don't get loyalty points at Starbucks. It doesn't matter if whatever AI generated art, a company uses, on the NFT is protectable when what people are buying is, a fancy loyalty program, in many ways, not a security. So yeah, it's it's a very interesting space, and it's a very interesting collision of two, very recent technology trends.
Yeah, and so I think with all of that, and some of our blockchain or NFT clients may sort of have already jumped off of that chair in that picture, but as in-house lawyers who are just dealing with AI for the first time, or integrating tools for the first time, or understanding how to allow their employees to integrate it into their output for the first time, we talked about regulation. It's starting to catch up, but it's not there yet. It often has to break a little before regulators really start to get involved. I'd love for for Arjun, for you, and then for Jennifer, and any of you actually, Andrew, as well. Like, we only have about 5 minutes total, so like, let's keep it short. But can you just tell us what clients should really be treading most carefully on, and maybe where they can just jump in head first? So that would be great to sort of know what you think is sort of that risk continuum for our clients in terms of risks. So.
Yeah, I mean, as we've probably all seen, like, there's a bit of a feeding frenzy going on with the rush to just incorporate AI, use AI, roll out AI features, say that you're an AI company. And, I think some of that is slowing down. I think companies are running into there's been enough news about the things that have gone wrong that I think people are starting to take more of a step back. Think about, the downside of AI, and like how you can try to implement it responsibly. I think, the area I'd see going into kind of head first is sort of just like the productivity tools, for like, it's kind of like the boring stuff, but like for engineers, I think if you talk to an engineer, like, Copilot is like an incredible innovation for them. Like, I would guess that like we're going to see startups founded with smaller teams because they can just, build out a code base with AI tools. Like, it lets you kind of 10x your productivity. And I see like a lot of potential there, where, especially with startups, like maybe they're willing to take on that risk, and you might see just an influx of new companies built like more leanly. I think the areas where you want to tread carefully are like, as soon as you're exposing AI features to your users, which a lot of, companies are trying to do right now, all the risks we talked about around, potentially infringing content, harmful content, risks to kids. Those are areas I think that are really concerning. There's not a lot of regulation right now that's actually like in force that is preventing that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of how I see the split right now.
So Jennifer, what do you think in terms of where you can go in a little faster? And as lawyers, we like to not say no because we like to find creative solutions at Fenwick. But I do find myself very occasionally saying no a little bit more loud, and then going into a conversation where I need to sort of stop my startup founders for a second to pause so they listen to sort of some of the risks that might actually exist. So where do you find yourself in those conversations?
I'll just give you a visual. Just think of the blade of grass. That can be your takeaway. If I'm a company and my entire business model is selling beautiful digitally rendered blades of grass, then probably using an AI tool to create that and sell it is very risky, because that's your value proposition. If this is a component of something much larger, then your risk is much more manageable, and then you can analogize that to whatever it is that your company does. A module of a piece of code that you can pull out easily if it turns out that it's not protectable and you really want to own it. So I would really look at it like that. And I find living by example can resonate easily. It helps me understand, and so you can translate that into whatever your business does. That's why I would think about it, or recommend people think about it right now from a risk perspective. And depending on where you are as a business, watch what others are doing, especially who's being sued and so on. I talk to a lot of you guys, or we talk to a lot of you guys about where you are in that risk continuum. If your company isn't the one that's going to be sued, you can probably manage some of those internal risks too, by having a plan for swapping something out if you need to.
I guess my takeaways probably would be, just remember existing law continues to apply to AI, and there's no AI washing. And we saw that in the joint announcement of multiple regulators, that you alluded to at the beginning of the presentation. And also make darn sure you know where your training data is coming from.
Zach, any online questions for us before we wrap up? Okay. So, obviously I want to thank each of you for all that great insight, and appreciate your time today. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.